Welcome to this edition of Great Books, a lively discussion of a selection from the canon of exceptional literature. Here's your host, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Great Books Show. I'm Jack Hatfield. Our panel meets monthly to discuss great works of classic and modern literature. Today we're discussing On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. Jake will introduce the work. Jake?
John Stuart Mill was perhaps the most influential English philosopher of the 19th century. The son of a stern and demanding father, Mill was educated at home. He was a most precocious student, beginning the study of Greek at age 3 and Latin at 9. By the age of 14, Mill had read most of the Greek and Latin classics. Moreover, he had read widely in history and engaged in substantial study of logic and mathematics. Mill died in Avignon, France in 1873, by which time he had produced works on political economy, logic, ethics, and religion, completed a 36-year career with the British East India Company, and served 3 years in Parliament. Mill believed the individual was sovereign over his or her own mind and body. Accordingly, he was keen to set forth the socially necessary limits constraining the individual's pursuit of his or her own good in their own way. Thus, his most famous work, the long essay On Liberty, examines the nature and limits of society's use of civic power to limit individual freedom. Our discussion centers around 3 sequential excerpts from On Liberty. The first excerpt concerns itself with a general sketch of the various domains of civil liberty as Mill sees them. Mill confines himself in the second excerpt to one branch of civil liberty's domain, that of thought, speech, and writing, which he deems absolutely critical for evaluating opinions and experience. Finally, in the third excerpt, based on the utilitarian principle that we become more valuable to society as we become more valuable to ourselves, Mill examines the importance of responsible individuality, both to our well-being as persons and to the health of our society.
It's going to be an interesting topic since it's certainly applicable to our time, as probably every time. My first question is, what is the purpose of government, according to Mill?
Self-protection of society. I think he says that right on the first page, that it's you give up a right to protect society, because today he would be identified as a real conservative, I think, because he's such a believer in individual rights, not
like
collective.
A libertarian.
Not collective.
A libertarian.
Pardon me?
A libertarian.
Exactly. Yeah.
But,
and I think he says it on page 17. He talks about that principle, that the sole end for which mankind are warranted individually or collectively in interfering with the liberty and action of any of their member is self-protection. And I think that's what he means by govern.
does he also mention the responsibility of the individual toward society, besides not hurting other people?
Yeah, the individual has a duty to help preserve the civilized state by developing his understanding.
He has a great line in there, and I'm trying to remember what it is, about doing nothing a lot of times is very destructive, and so it's...
Yeah,
Inaction, it can be as bad as bad action.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
On page 19, he says a person may cause evil to others not only by his actions, but by his inaction. And in either case, he is justly accountable to them for the injury.
Right.
So if he stands by and watches some harm, then he is liable.
Well, not necessarily.
Not
Later on,
necessarily.
it
There are
says you better
special
be darn
expediencies.
careful, yes.
Yeah.
What about someone who goes off by himself and just says, let me alone, goes off in the cave?
And doesn't hurt anybody else?
Right.
By doing it? Perfectly okay.
I might disagree with
Well,
you.
Unless he indirectly hurts society.
You're talking according to Jack Hatfield or Mills?
Mill.
Mills.
And you might disagree with that?
Not might, I do disagree with it.
Oh, tell me why.
What he says, you have responsibility toward society, and that there are, he says, many positive acts for the benefits of others, which he might rightfully be compelled to perform. And he gives a bunch of stuff. Let's see. So anyway, he's saying that you're a member of society, therefore you have to contribute to society. So I think he would say going off by yourself is not contributing to society.
Over himself, this is page 18.
Yeah, sure.
Over himself,
That's true,
over
but he's
his
both.
body and mind, the individual is sovereign. If that individual decides to go in the cave, it's okay.
See, I
Well, it's
disagree.
not okay. You just can't be compelled to come out because you're not hurting anybody, or if you're not hurting anybody.
Well, what do you mean?
Although, if
I
you
heard a
belong to a
contradiction.
society, if you belong to society, then you have certain obligations to that society.
Then how do you put that together with what I just read?
Well,
That the individual is sovereign. What
but the individual has two parts, the selfish part and the social part. Man is a social creature, he's a rational creature, and his job is to seek his own well-being.
right out of Aristotle.
Well,
Right
more or
on the
less, except
And
that,
Mill.
except that, you know, in seeking your own well-being, you also contribute value to the society. The two are interrelated. You cannot contribute value to society.
But what about his example? I mean, couldn't the person who's about to go into the cave say, "Look, this is a lifestyle that no one's explored
That's
before."
right, he could.
And he could say, "I'm going into that cave, and I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm not going to." But I think Thoreau, Thoreau decides he's going to go off someplace. He doesn't feel like he owes anything to society. He thinks he's contributing to society by doing this
Yeah,
because he's setting an
Thoreau did.
example.
But
so
he
isn't
published
that?
what is, if he didn't do anything, if he didn't publish, as we all know, Thoreau is through since he wrote it, has been read by an awful lot of people and has contributed to I think, the common good.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Which is
why
very
couldn't
different.
that be?
But if you go off in a
Well,
cave,
Thoreau, he's
let's
not a
say
good
somebody-
example,
let's say-
Thoreau, believe me.
Forget the Thoreau.
The hermits of the 3rd century thought they were contributing by going out to the desert.
I think you guys have put your finger on the tension in Mill. I don't think Mill really resolves this. On the one hand, he says you can do anything you want as long as you don't hurt anybody, but, and he says it right here in this first paragraph. He's in the paragraph that you were quoting from,
Yes.
Jack. It says, "I regard utility, meaning happiness, as the ultimate appeal on all ethical questions." Okay, so fine, and that would seem to support you, right? The second half of the sentence is, "But it must be utility in the largest sense, grounded on the permanent interests of man as a progressive being." Who gets to say what the permanent interests of a man as a progressive being are? Mill has his own ideas about what the permanent interests of man as a progressive being are. He expostulates on some of them toward the end of the essay. But so what? I mean, that's just an assertion. I mean, maybe the interests of man has something more to do with this. That solitariness. What about the hermits? In the
that's
desert.
a
I mean,
better
the solitary people. They're going off to pursue holiness or their idea of
leaves it- I
holiness,
think he
and
leaves
by
it
their very
vague.
example, they're going to be. But they don't care about.
I think he leaves it vague for a reason.
The monastic life.
Right, the monastic life. I mean, you're going off and you're doing
But
something.
Dave
you
was
don't
going to
care
say
about.
something.
No, I think he leaves it vague for a reason, because you said that it's not very clear what the criteria are for the responsibility of the individual. And when he talks about the idea that it just left me, but he's talking about talk about something else.
When he talks about-
I think he does actually give you some idea of what he thinks. Toward
Yeah,
the end of
he
the
does.
essay,
He
individuality,
does.
creativity,
So
all that kind of stuff, which is all fine, but
He
that's
does,
just
but
Mill's idea.
he says that
Well, the whole thing is his idea, of course.
No. But he doesn't seem to see the tension between the two parts of his principle.
Yes,
the
he
one
does.
part being
I
really.
think he
Show
does.
me.
I think he does.
when he talks about fallibility
look at
and
the
that
end.
nobody's infallible, then one of the obvious choices is to do nothing, because you can just not move forward because you're afraid to express an opinion. But it's your responsibility to express an opinion, and so that's what he's doing. When it doesn't make him right or infallible, because he says that I think it's this, that, or the other, but that it's everybody's responsibility to take responsibility for their own opinions and utter them if they really believe them and understand them.
Right. Which I don't have any. I don't see that as being an issue. But what he did was he developed the idea of opinions as a way of leading into the next part, which is actions. And he says, because if you have opinions, you have to have actions, or else what's the point of having an opinion, right? That's where I think that's where I see the tension developing is when because he has some idea of what it is that fulfills human beings. His idea is we're rational creatures, so we have to be rational. We have to be able to, which is fine, and I agree with all of that. But the point is that that's simple assertion,
right?
And there may be other people who have other ideas about what's fulfilling to a human being, and the idea that those other people may have may be that going into a cave and being a hermit and cultivating their holiness is really what's going to help them. And it may help other people too, but that's not really their interest.
Jack, have we answered your question about government?
Not quite.
No, no.
I don't think the hermit contributes to the common weal.
That's right. I agree with you.
The defense of the country, paying taxes, paving the roads, whatever it is that he abstains from. So that's not allowed under his.
So in other words, under Mill, it would be okay. It would be okay to go in for the government to restrict that person's liberty. Go into the cave and pull them out and say, we don't care what you do, but whatever you do, it's got to contribute to the
That's right.
society.
Yeah.
Okay. People are comfortable with that.
So we got two different opinions.
Yes.
And you guys are wrong, and two of us are right. So going on.
Well, he thinks that man is created to be civilized.
And he also thinks that only a very few percentage of people are capable of it.
Well,
the vast majority of people.
Perfect civilization.
No,
yes.
or even to carry on this kind of discussion.
Well, we just
barbarians,
think we're smart.
children.
We're created to attain the capacity of guiding our own improvement. That's what he says. We're supposed to be individuals. We can discover our own well-being from our experience and from conversation with our fellows. You can't discover truth without your fellow man or some kind of context in which there is a dialogue. Mm-hmm. Truth is a part of utility. That's what he means by the principle of utility. It's given. To be human is to develop and grow. It's like a tree, as his symbol in there. And he assumes all that.
You do what? I'm sorry.
He assumes all that.
He assumes all that, right?
Let me go to slightly different things. Because he's saying that, like I think Jake was getting at, was that any opinion you have to discuss it with other people in a group, okay?
All right.
That's one thing he says. But the other thing he says that you should hold your opinions, and he uses religion as an example, as being better than anybody else. Those two seem that they could conflict.
Say that again, then.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
why don't you
confused
say
me.
that, Jack?
Yes, could you point that out, Jack?
Well, there are two things. Did you get any theory has to be tested among a group of people, okay? And then on, I think it's 34, he's saying that it has to be, your opinion should be better than. He doesn't use those exact words. He says, the struggle lasts to give the doctrine or creed an ascendancy over other creeds.
Where is that?
You have to defend it. You have to understand it and defend it. But you don't, and the only reason you assert superiority is because you're giving your reasons which you think are superior.
I think he's saying you have to hold it.
You have to hold it. That's right.
Until somebody proves you're wrong.
Right.
34?
Right around here.
The data contradict
You
it.
can't just mouth it.
Right. But if you,
I have it
if you say
underlined.
you have your view is better than, I'm reading that as a sentence belief, okay, better than other ones. It is very difficult then to be open to other ones. Can be done, but I think it's very, very difficult. If I say I have
The only
a
way
better
to do it,
religion-
he says, though, is to understand the arguments of the other side and to research them, and not just to go with the ones that agree with yourself or representatives of your own side. supposing that the opposition says
Sure.
X.
But if you feel that your religion, your view, is better than anyone else's, why would you do that?
Well, he gives you reasons. Some of them are that there may be there may be pieces of the truth that aren't included in your view, and that you wouldn't actually know. The context of this particular paragraph I thought was actually very interesting. It's right at the beginning of the paragraph. He says. It's illustrated in the experience of almost all ethical doctrines and religious creeds. They are full of meaning and vitality to those who originate them and to the direct disciples. Their meaning continues to be felt because they're in a situation in which they're in a minority. They have to defend their views. They're being challenged. I thought about this in terms of the way things may develop in our country, but then after a while it becomes, especially when they reach the majority, it becomes acquiescent. It becomes stultified.
You have to keep
There's
the
no
challenge
vitality
alive.
in it, and then it's very difficult for people to continue for it to make any impact on their
Right.
lives.
You don't have the
Exactly.
same fire
Yeah.
in the belly unless you keep the dialogue alive. And
Right.
keep reaffirming why it's true, if it's true.
Otherwise, it's empty dogma.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Perceived
social
opinion.
groups have to grow just like trees too. They all have to grow and develop. I mean, that's part of our human nature. We have to develop ourselves. That's what it means, to strive for well-being.
But this doesn't mean that you can't come to decisions like you were talking about, where
you have
you
to.
think that after you've interacted in the way that he recommends interacting, that whatever your view is, whether it's modified, unmodified, that at the end you come out feeling that at least at this moment this is the best account so far that you have of things.
Sure, it's your duty
Here's
to
a
act
good-
on the
yeah.
best that you know about yourself.
Here's a good way of putting it. You have to have a choice. You have to make the choice as opposed to just accepting it.
Right.
I think, that's what makes it real to you, as you say, kind of inside as opposed to empty dogma.
Right.
Is
Well-
making that choice on
Right.
anything.
He talks about how to act to the best of your ability. He talks about this principle of, I don't know if it's a principle, but something kind of a criterion of sufficient assurance. He says, here's how you test your opinion. And you're never right. It's always an asymptotic approach to truth. And you act on it till you get something different. Just like, science does or anybody does.
I think he says it, on the last page here, in 42.
He sums it up.
But there's two parts that one of us, and even to himself, there's a full equivalent in the better development of the social part of his nature, rendered possible by the restraint upon the selfish part, which I think was a cool way of saying. Then he says, to be held to rigid rules of justice for the sake of others develops the feelings and capabilities which have the good of others for their object. I thought that was really interesting and how true.
I agree.
So.
I think you put your finger on something, though, Jake, that I found myself wondering. There's almost an implication that you have to leave everything, that basically everything, you always have to hold your views provisionally. And I don't think people actually can really live like that. I mean, sooner or later, you have to, I forget who it was, somebody once said that sooner or later you have to join the side you're on. That there are these, what do you call, I'm not sure what to call them, forks in the road where you have to take a fork. And after a while you build structures on those forks. And the idea that you can leave that open provisionally and that you're always going to measure your assent proportionally to the evidence, I don't think that's how humans actually operate.
I think it provisionally means if that fork proves to be wrong and you realize it's wrong, then you throw away that view. And you said, so that's what provisionally means.
Right,
But that's
what I'm
not how he
talking about-
looks
but
at
that's
it.
not-
He says most of the time there's some truth on both sides, whichever fork you take.
But I'm thinking about like 10 forks back. I mean, let's say at 10 forks back, you've made a decision which puts you in a certain relation to other things, which really can't be recapitulated later on. I don't think.
Because you've extrapolated so many other opinions from it.
I think that the idea. I may be wrong. Maybe that's not what he's saying. Maybe
I think you're
because
right.
in a way, he also says the opposite. He says people need to develop their individuality. They need to become who they are. Well, becoming who you are can't be forever provisional.
But if you don't take a
It
risk,
depends on how deeply you go in questioning the basic premises, because you could make yourself nuts if you question the bedrock premises.
But
And you'll never get
sometimes
to the higher.
they're proved wrong.
That's
but
true.
it's okay.
That's true.
Because you do something. There's an expression, I don't know, the open mind never acts. it keeps on investigating, investigating, and somewhere along the line, you're going to close your mind and take an action. And when
That's nothing to do with what I said, though.
but when-
Because what I was saying is that those bedrock sort of things you've based on can be proven wrong by action. And if they're proven wrong, then you say, aha, maybe I should do it a different way.
You might undergo a conversion experience. Then again, you
Yeah.
might incorporate it, or
Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of forks in the road, and some determine you can't go back. Moving finger rights, having written moves on.
Think of Galileo, okay, questioning these basic premises of the Ptolemaic system. That's a basic premise, and it was questioned and resisted, but when things are questioned, you have to respond. You can't close your mind. I think that's
But the other side is you can't always be a stem cell.
You can't always be what?
Can't always be a stem cell.
No.
You can't always be pluripotent or multipotent. I mean, it's like with stem cells. I mean, at a certain point they can become any cell, but at a certain point they make this direction, which means that closes off a whole bunch of options to them, and then they take the. And I don't know that you can ever really fully
Good
go
example,
back.
because stem cells might take us one way, and then all of a sudden evolution says that doesn't work.
But not for that stem cell. That stem cell's doomed. I mean, if
Sure.
evolution says that
Sure.
isn't going to work.
But for the whole
for the race?
organism, it'll say, okay, then over a period of time, that it's been proved not conducive to natural selection, and so it's erased.
Yeah, but we're talking about human beings here
individuals.
with a bunch of faculties, and he lists his sense of what the faculties are, and he says that, we can make judgments. We're rational creatures seeking our own well-being. That's his well-being. That's one of his bedrock assumptions. Now, if we don't like that, we can cite all kinds of evidence
we've
that
taken
isn't
an
the
extreme
case.
where we have paralysis by analysis, and if everybody sits around questioning their most basic premises, nothing will ever get done. And I don't think he's recommending that.
No,
but
he
I
isn't.
think he's recommending that when a premise is questioned, you listen to the question and analyze the reservations and rethink it. And maybe your own prejudice will be reaffirmed and maybe not. But you can't start from ground zero every day. And I think that's
saying
where
that.
we're going with this, and that's
But
unrealistic.
anyway, I think as you've read this thing, what other things jumped out as you, either questions or something that you go, aha?
This is like the third time I'd read it, and no, the fourth.
Me too.
The first was when we did this in the thing, and I read it twice then, and then twice this time, and I realized how different my response was. The thing that jumped out at me this time was that the power of the principle, that is that nothing. That liberty cannot be restricted except on the basis of harm to somebody else. I mean, it's a very powerful thing. In fact, it almost seems self-evident. But the more, who's going to deny it, really? But the more you get into it, the hazier it became for me. Like the whole idea of harm. What's harm? I mean, he says, what is harm? I mean, is harm, if I say I've been harmed by somebody, is that it? Does that mean it's true? I mean, you simply have to accept it. If I'm offended by the fact that I'm an orangeman and you come in with green, and I'm offended by that, and it bothers me, and I feel I've been harmed by that, do you have to take that? Do you have to take that at face
That's
value?
not his model. Look at what he says. He quotes Helmholtz in there.
Or victimless crime is it's not hurting let's say prostitution. It's not hurting the prostitute, maybe,
Exactly.
or it's not hurting.
Yes.
What does it hurt society?
Well, that's the
That's-
thing.
that's- it's very general, exactly what you-
Exactly. What is harm?
Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Is there a harm to society by permitting?
Doesn't society determine what harm is? Because that's when we say you go to prison or you don't go to prison.
No, I don't think so at all.
Well, who does that?
Jack.
If it's not society, who's determining what harm is?
Well, by Mill's principle, it should be we should kind of figure out what harm is, and then limit the scope of the possibility of going to prison
We should
to
discuss
only those things that are.
Yeah, because different societies have it. Nazi Germany had a certain view that wasn't open to discussion, and I think that was the wrong it wasn't good for that society. It wasn't good for a lot of the individuals, of course. So.
The fact that there are different societies means there are different harms, but it's society that society decides that, no? Let's
There's no
take the
intrinsic
opposite. Let's say
harm.
society doesn't decide. Who does?
Well, then,
Who comes up with the answer?
well, maybe, well, like I say, it seems to me that like on certain college campuses, I know the signal 3 minutes left. So I'll try to make this quick. On certain college campuses, there's microaggressions, and the basis of the microaggression is that the student feels aggressed, and if you take it at face value, then that's one way of approaching it. The problem is if you take it at face value, you've got all sorts of claims of harm that conflict, which means that government, and the whole idea here was to limit the scope of government. Government now has to come in and adjudicate between these two people.
Courts do. Yeah, but that's not what he's talking. He's talking about overarching images. You know, it's got to be harmony. Harmonic, you know, you're supposed to develop the beauty of each individual. That's his controlling image. Then you got the tree. Then you've got this other stuff.
Yeah,
and you guys are way down here at the bottom.
Because what he's saying is that the only way you're going to develop like a tree is to have this principle in effect. So if that's the condition for developing like a tree, then we better figure out what that principle means.
The principle is the inner drive to meaning and rationality is what he's saying. You might disagree with him, but that's what he says.
No, I understand that, and I do agree with him. But I think that what he's saying is we have to structure society in such a way as to allow that to happen. And he thinks that this way of structuring society is going to allow that to happen, which means we better figure out what harm is.
He thinks it's the safest way to allow that to happen. You don't want to, you know, and then he gives you the 3 ways of looking at it, and he gives you a whole set of, but their higher principles are not down at this level of individual choice. And he leaves a big space for people just to operate on their own, not in terms of society punishing.
Well, Joe's thinking of use cases, and those have to be considered. You know, the individual cases of these things.
But not as great principles of government.
But that determines what the scope of government is. I mean, if government, like in the colleges, the administration then has to come in and say, okay, look, we're going to base a decision on rights or something like that. But that means that
it's
that's
up to
something
them to make that, to articulate
some authoritative coercive unit has now come into this and has
and
said
they have
we're
to
going
justify
to
that this is harmful.
Yeah.
And they'll get you to testify one way or the other, and we'll go from there. But that's a lower level. There's tiers of
Sure, that's what we're saying, but
principle here is,
it's not.
and he's not operating at that level very much.
I think he still is. It has to start there.
That has to be the foundation. I don't think
Otherwise,
his
it's
foundation
meaningless.
is clear. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time as we discuss another great selection. As Aristotle said, the best way to learn is to get together in small groups and discuss great ideas.